Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about county resource management plans, how they fit into the big federal picture of land planning on public lands. As a lot of the counties in the state are a majority of federally controlled lands, it's because of a really important issue. Joining us for a conversation is the county level perspective, Jim Mattson, a very active commissioner from Kane County, joining us. Thanks for making the trip again, Jim.
You bet.
And from the State Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, that is a mouthful,
Yes, it is.
Reg Johnson, who is the liaison to guys like Jim around the state. Reg, thank you for joining us for this conversation and for this material right here. I want to start the conversation by just clarifying what the best relationship is between a county and a federal land agency, because there's cooperating, coordinating, consulting.
Consistency.
What is the distinction between just cooperating with a public land agency and coordinating with them? Some people would not see a difference.
You know, in any kind of an effort that goes on in terms of land management planning with the federal agencies, Forest Service and BLM, you know, there's a set of processes in place, and most of those have shown up as primarily as cooperating agencies, as if the two agencies themselves will cooperate with each other. But there are some sidebars on that limit, you know, what you might possibly be able to accomplish in that setting. And with us in our county, we're strongly committed to these resource plans that have just recently started to develop and evolve over time. And with that, we intend to be coordinating our resource objectives directly with the federal agencies and being able to work in both environments and bring them together or separate them apart as we need to be able to get to the objectives that we want and require.
So, Reg, without what was it, House Bill 323, right, that set this up? Without 323 that passed a couple of years ago in the legislature, would counties like Jim's actually be able to get into this coordinating posture with a federal agency?
So there were a couple of counties that had done this prior to HB 323, but this was the first time a state has done it with all counties in the state, and then use those county plans to help develop a state resource management plan. So under the Federal Lands Policy Management Act, or FLPMA, it does offer the states certain rights, or local governments. You have state, local, and tribal lands that if they have approved resource management plans, then these federal agencies are supposed to be as consistent as possible under the law with those approved resource management plans. So it gives us an extra weight when we're in discussions with BLM or Forest Service if we have these plans in place. And this process was attempted twice before, once under Governor Rampton and once under Governor Leavitt. But this was the first time we've been able to bring it to fruition and get all 29 counties and all 29 counties to develop a plan plus the state plan in place.
In addition to FLPMA, there's NIFMA, the National Forest Management Act, you know, which runs on a parallel track. And,
yes.
and Reg mentioned Forest Service, but we haven't really focused that much on that opportunity as of yet.
So this bill didn't say here's $50,000 or $100,000, however much it ended up being for each county between the different people that got the funding to help them put these. It said you have to do it and you have to have it to us by a deadline. Was that not correct?
Yes, it was recommended that every county have these plans, and each county was given $50,000 to write the plans, and then there was another $50,000 per county that went to the associations of governments, which helped develop a database for the science behind the plans. So we strongly encourage the counties to make their plans as data-driven as possible, use as much as the best science as possible, and the Association of Governments were great in helping acquire that data.
And that funding that helped generate came from the Community Impact Board, mineral lease monies, you know, as we put those together in that fashion. So it was a big help.
Does that funding and these resource management plans with data behind them, does that make them more compelling for the federal agencies to have to perform to what the county is seeking if they're coordinating with them?
It certainly makes it stronger when we're making our arguments with them versus it being just the opinions of a county or the opinions of a state. To actually have data behind it really helps, and we're seeing some good results as the fact that we've gone through that process and gathered the data, I believe.
Yes, and also at county level, that opportunity to identify what those elements are and the opportunities are has helped us fine-tune where our focus is going to be. Without that, I don't think we'd be looking at that to the degree that we can now.
Jim makes a great point there in that the county plans are very local and specific, and the state plan is more overarching. So that allows the federal agencies to look specifically in certain projects in a watershed or with grazing and identify what's important for that county. And the state plan is more overarching and allows the counties to look at things specific to their local watersheds or their local impacts that they're having with beetle kill or some other local impacts.
Does that really help the counties kind of fine-tune to their culture? I mean, Grand County is going to look at public land use planning really differently than Kane County or, say, Wayne County.
That's likely to occur, just given what the drivers are on a local basis. But one of the other things that it allows us to do is to seek common kinds of processes in counties that border each other and have the same national forest.
Well, I guess that's true. National forest policy is determined by the forest, but in your case, 2 or 3 counties are wrapped up in Dixie.
Yeah, or on BLM lands, at the field office level, a good fire sharpens everybody's minds, and it doesn't recognize county boundaries. What are you doing with the vegetation out there to protect yourself from those kind of problems?
Do these plans actually help confront conflicting policies with the federal agencies? Are they more bound to listen to you with a good data-driven resource management plan when you say, we want to do this, our plan says this, we've adopted it, the state's adopted it, and you're going the other direction?
We think it does. There's an opportunity for agencies at all levels, so the local level, the state level, and the federal level, to identify where we can all work together on those issues. And if we have the data driven behind it, it does help. And sometimes it helps the federal agencies to do what they would like to do, but for one reason or another they may be tied to a certain policy or a certain regulation. We can say, hey, look, at the local level, we would like these beetle kill trees taken care of for safety, health, safety, and welfare of the citizens, for our watershed, for things like that. And so we're able to push projects through to fruition that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Might that impact litigation? I'm thinking of the whole situation on the Dixie with the whatever environmental group it was that got the restraining order on the Forest Service doing the beetle kill up there a couple of dozen years ago that brought on the Bryan Head fire.
So all of that, absolutely. It's going to give us, I think, the impetus to be really thoughtful and careful about what our objectives are going to be, and then being able to levy that kind of argument and follow up with a legal challenge if necessary. Right now we're involved in legal challenges as it relates to access. This will bridge that whole question too. So I expect to see our plan start to deal with that RS 2477 thing as we look at in counties and extra counties, out of those counties.
So there's one other element of FLTMA that we haven't really talked about. We've talked about, coordinating, cooperating, but there's also consistency. Can you kind of clear the air on what a consistency element is in FLTMA?
Sure. So the 3 things that you have are cooperating agency, which is a formal process that we go through where we sign up as a cooperating agency, then we are able to work with them early and often, we hope. Then coordination is an ongoing process where with these plans we go through. And then consistency review is where we have these local and state plans. As much under the law as possible. They're supposed to be as consistent as possible under the law, I think is how the language goes. So with that, if our resource management plans, either at the county or state level, says that we would like to have a beetle kill infestation taken care of within 6 months after identification of the, so that's very consistent. And sometimes you don't see that in the federal side as a time frame being put to it. They want to take care of the beetle, but there's not always a time frame. So sometimes we're able to speed up, say, hey, our plan says this, we want you to be consistent and have that beetle kill problem taken care of within a specific time. So that's how we help move some of these projects along. Is please be consistent with what our plans say. And we're seeing a lot more willingness of the federal agencies to work with us on those consistency issues. But that's the consistency side part of it.
I think the dangling opportunity is timeliness too of these actions. You know, as you mentioned, a beetle kill process or a fire and a fire salvage afterwards. Let's deal with those things as rapidly as we can instead of just hanging around waiting for some budget element to show up that drives it 3 or 4 years in the future, and the values are all gone and messed up. So.
Are there situations in the past, I mean, I have some come to mind, I don't know if they're applicable or not, but I look at the horse situation in the West Desert. I look at Dixie Mountain and the beetle kill and the resultant fire. I look at the revegetation at Mill Flat. I look at all these different things that have happened with fires, with resource degradation, with these time frames that have all been heavily litigated. Sage grouse, there's another big one. Had this been in place, would this have made these situations different on the ground today than they are now?
I absolutely think they would. In fact, to the point that where if we can jointly set priorities on how to deal with this, you know, the WRI efforts that have gone on, you know, with the habitat and landscape-based treatments that are out there treating that large bunch of, or that whole biomass mess that's out there, by having targets and objectives set, we can move forward in that direction. We're also partners in that process, so we're not completely dependent upon the federal budget to get that stuff done, so we can do those things jointly.
I agree with that. There are some challenges. You brought up wild horses. That's one of them. There are some things where this is going to work really well for us to speed up this process and to get the projects done. There are some, like the wild horse issue, where that's a congressional rider that's on that, and that's kind of what's slowing it up, not so much BLM not wanting to take care of it, but some of the constraints that they have. So there are gray areas in there that we have to work through. But if we have the language in these plans, I think it will help in the long run, and it might actually help put some pressure on Congress to take care of some of these issues. So.
Can you force them to redirect their funding? If you're saying, we got to deal with this beetle kill in 6 months, and they're saying, well, we don't have the funding for it, and you say, yeah, but this is in our plan, you got to be consistent, is that going to make them shuffle things around?
I think so. You know, when we can also offer up funds, you know, to help augment that process, but I think we can start to target that and have that taken care of in that fashion.
I wish I could be as optimistic on the funding aspect of it. I'm not sure I can. We would like them to do that, and I think the second part of Jim's answer is probably more where we're going to have to go is let's get them to do the NEPA on it, to approve the project, but it might be where the local and the state has to step in with some funding or matching funds to help with these projects. But that is one of the constraints we see on the agencies sometimes with doing the projects is they can't use the funds, as in the wild horse and burro issue. They've been mandated by Congress that they can't use funds for that, or that they don't have enough funds to do it, and so they're constricted in those things.
One of the things that goes along this line, and it's emerging and it's coming back to Utah, but in actuality, Utah developed this to begin with, but the Good Neighbor Authority. As we've been able to work with the agencies and use state agencies and their professional capability in order to set projects up so that once the NEPA is done, then let's go figure out how to get the treatments put into place that are desperately needed.
So that does raise a question. You've got National Environmental Policy Act, I can say that, NEPA, and it's a set of processes and procedures they have to do to take environmental things into concern before they take action on anything. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and we're talking about oil and gas drilling. I mean, NEPA just always seems to show up. and it has a lot of pitfalls in it. Do these resource management plans tie the hands of some of those who would slow that process up? I mean, would it affect a litigant going to court and the court looking at it and say, well, they got to be consistent on consistency review, and your case doesn't take the standing? I mean, is that a real argument? Is that a wishful argument? Does that exist?
That may be more of a wishful argument in the litigation side, but I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to pass judgment on that. But
I think that'll be tested.
Well, that's said with an air of authority, Jim.
Tested, yes. You know, to the extent that we can make sure we can get that opportunity, I think that really is where we need to be thinking about going with this. Reg, I've got a question for you. As we look at these state overarching plans and so on, will that kind of take a look at gaps or needs between counties, and will that drive some things that'll take place at a county level? And have you encountered that yet?
We have not encountered that officially yet. There have been some discussions during the legislative session on how we were going to handle that, and so far we haven't seen any direct conflicts between counties, which would kind of surprise me going through the process. And you have 29 different counties out there. I thought we may have more conflicts across county lines, but we haven't seen a lot of that. But when that does come up, there is a process where we become aware of that. Either one county or another says, you know, there's an inconsistency here. Then our office will work with the two counties and try to mediate an outcome towards that. If we're not able to mediate the outcome, then we'll go to the legislature and say we have an issue between the counties. You know, how should we address that in the plans? But right now, it's everybody kind of doing a good faith effort to make the best.
What is your optimism about this whole thing going forward?
I'm very optimistic. We're just starting with the implementation process, but as you know, the Manti LaSalle and the Ashley Forest are going through forest plan revision process right now, and both forests have reached out to us and said, we know that you have these county resource management plans and the state resource management plan. They've all been formally adopted by the county or by the state. We want to work with you. They're reading through the plans right now to see what the county or the state's goals, policies, and objectives are under the 28 resources that these plans cover. And they're taking a look at that and identifying where there are consistencies, where there may be inconsistencies, what we need to work on. But they've been very good so far about reaching out to us and saying, we understand the plans are in place, how do we work together?
It's also causing us at the county level with our citizenry and our people and the people who are interested in resources to think more clearly about this process and what do we want, you know, and how do we bring this together. So our resource committee will be working directly at and around this problem in question, and they're ready to get into it as soon as possible with the agencies. Very
interesting. The whole process happened. You know, it's like an inaugural speech at this time and place in history. Do you think that it's fortuitous that we have a more friendly administration to the West to get this started so it sets some precedents?
I do. I think, you know, we have a few years here where we've heard from the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture that they would like to see more cooperation with local and state governments. And I think that gives us an opportunity to set in place how we coordinate, how we have consistency review with these plans. And if we have 3-4 years of setting that up, I think that's definitely beneficial.
I think that'll go a long ways, and I think it just kind of helps set the interface between the agencies and the counties to work on that sort of thing. And there's an open attitude toward that now.
Will it be harder to change the trajectory once that has 4 to 6 years under its belt in another administration? Will it make it harder for them to say, nah, we kind of want to go back to where it was?
Well, if we let it do that, you know, we're at fault.
Well, I guess that's a good point. Last thoughts, gentlemen.
The opportunities are here. We just simply need to take advantage of them to the extent possible and work with each other cooperatively as we go forward. And that includes working with the federal agencies.
What does somebody sitting in Sandy, Utah, in their living room watching this right now, who doesn't really have one bat of the eye thought about a county resource management plan, what should they take away that's relevant to them?
To me, I think they ought to take away the thought that there is a process in place at the county level that will help deal with those landscape opportunities and what we have to do in terms of protection and opportunities as we move forward. So it just isn't a big gray or a white hole. It's going to have something in it, that we can work on.
I think one of the things they need to be aware of, the CUP project brings water from the Uinta Mountains all the way to the Wasatch Front. So they should be concerned about the forest health in the Uintas, even though it's not in their county, about how that could affect their water and the delivery of those waters. Also for recreation. A lot of these folks like to go down and recreate in those areas and those roads, whether they're RS-2477 roads or the Hole in the Rock roads and RS-2477 road. A lot of these plans identify those areas that they want to have recreation in, or they want these roads to be open for recreation. So there's a lot of things that impact the urban Wasatch Front that are identified in these plans, and we want the best health of the ecosystem out there while also protecting the economies of the rural areas.
How these plans are handled, will that also affect fuel prices, food prices, and things like that on the Wasatch Front, or are they so far removed as far as energy development and grazing that they really don't have an effect up here in the city?
There definitely is an effect. I mean, maybe not on specific well going in or a specific allotment, but when you look at the grand scheme of things across the West and energy being produced and food and fiber, if we had more logging ability here and a better local timber industry, would that drive down some of the prices on 2x4s and 2x6s? I think so. In the past, we've had a better timber industry, more vibrant timber industry. So all those things are interrelated, and when you start picking off one or the other, then you start seeing price increases.
I think we'll have the ability to educate ourselves collectively, the communities and the people in the state, as to what the opportunities are, and not have these agendas driven by NGOs, non-governmental entities or organizations whose really they have a membership and a fundraising objective, and all they need is a good conflict, and they're home free. So we need to say, hey, wait a minute, there's processes in place, and it can be handled and taken care of.
Excellent. Gentlemen, good point. Thank you so much for the conversation. We're going to take a break from the county seat. When we come back, the deed has been done. The resource management plans have been completed. But just how much work did it take to make that happen? We'll find out when we come back on the ground.